I knew something was wrong the night I found 2 wine glasses in the sink, both with lipstick on the rim. Neither mine. Before I begin, please support me by subscribing and liking this video. It helps me share more stories like mine. He said she'd stop by to talk about school. She was 22, not 12. I didn't argue, just nodded and kept washing dishes while my hands shook under the water. By morning, she'd left her sweater on the back of his chair. I folded it and put it in a drawer by the garage, the one where I keep things I don't want to see again. You learn, after a certain age, that the people who hurt you never start with a single betrayal. It begins with glances, with laughter that stops when you walk into the room. I married Glenn 10 years after my first husband died. He was good-looking in that lazy way men get when they know they'll be forgiven for it. And for a while he was kind, brought me coffee in bed, took care of bills, made me feel like maybe the second half of life wouldn't be so lonely. Then, 3 years ago, his daughter moved in with us. Emma. Blonde hair, fast smile, the kind of confidence that eats rooms alive. Her mother had left early, and she always said she never got to know her real family. I believed that. I wanted to believe it. At first, she called me Nancy, soft and polite. Within months, it was Mom, in that sweet rehearsed tone. Glenn beamed when she said it. I pretended not to notice how she'd touch his arm when she passed him a plate. That night with the 2 wine glasses was the first time I caught myself watching instead of living. They laughed in the kitchen like teenagers while I sat on the couch pretending to read. My heart wasn't breaking. It was observing. Quietly, I tested it. Next morning, I asked Glenn if he'd seen my pearl earrings. He said no without looking up from his phone. Emma walked in wearing them. Said they matched her outfit. Glenn smiled like it was cute. The first real crack came 2 weeks later. Glenn's phone buzzed while he was in the shower. I don't go through phones. I was raised better. But this one flashed a message right across the screen. Can't stop thinking about last night. I stared at it until the screen went black. When he came out, towel around his waist, he looked at me differently. Not scared, just cautious. Like a man walking around a sleeping dog he knows might bite. We didn't talk that night, or the next, but they did. Soon after, he started suggesting that I take a trip. Said the house felt crowded, that I deserved some time away. I like it here, I said. It's my home. He smiled. Of course it is. That smile told me everything I needed to know. Emma stopped pretending after that. She'd leave her makeup on the bathroom counter, use my perfume, wear my sweaters, little things that said, "You don't belong here anymore." I didn't confront them. Not yet. Instead, I watched, collected, notes, dates, receipts. My mind's always been sharper than people think. One afternoon, I called my friend Carla. She's known me since before Glenn. I told her I might need a place to stay soon. She didn't ask why. Good friends never do. The next day, the mortgage company called. Said a refinance request had come through with my digital signature. Only problem was, I hadn't signed anything. That's when I realized it wasn't about love anymore. It was about ownership of the house, the accounts, the narrative. Glenn wanted me erased. Politely, efficiently, like deleting an old file. That night, I sat in bed pretending to sleep. Heard them whispering in the kitchen. Emma's voice. What if she doesn't leave? Glenn. Then we'll make her want to. I lay there with my eyes open until morning. The next morning, Glenn made me breakfast. Pancakes, eggs, bacon. A peace offering shaped like Sunday. He said I looked tired. I told him I hadn't slept. He said maybe I should see a doctor. For my nerves. That's how they do it. They don't throw you out. They make you doubt yourself until you walk out on your own. Emma laughed when he said it, pretending to hide it behind her coffee cup. I didn't react. Just kept cutting my pancakes into neat little squares like a patient in an experiment. By noon, he'd booked me a wellness retreat out of state, said it would help me recharge. The reservation confirmation came to my email, already paid with my own credit card. I didn't go. I printed the receipt and tucked it behind the family photo on the mantel, the one where we're all smiling under fake sunlight. Over the next few days, the house changed in quiet ways. My framed pictures disappeared. My slippers went missing. My seat at the dining table got moved down one place. The little rearrangements of a coup. Emma started referring to things as ours when talking to Glenn. Our kitchen, our garden, our plans. Glenn didn't correct her. I sat in the background, invisible, hearing my name fade from conversation like a bad word. One afternoon, I caught Emma in my bedroom, standing in front of my vanity mirror. She was wearing my robe, brushing her hair, humming softly. "Do you need something?" I asked. She smiled through the mirror. "Just borrowing some space. You don't mind, right?" "It's my room," I said. She shrugged. "Is it?" Something in me went cold. I walked out, locked myself in the laundry room, and stayed there until she left. That night, Glenn told me I'd been acting paranoid. He said Emma was just trying to bond. I told him to stop lying. He said I needed help. A week later, a doctor showed up at the house. Said Glenn had scheduled a wellness check. He tried to talk to me like I was confused, kept using my first name gently, like you do with children or the elderly. I told him I was fine. The next day, the doctor sent a report to Glenn recommending monitoring for cognitive decline. They were building a case. I spent nights awake, listening to the sounds of my own house. The fridge hum, the ticking clock, their footsteps in the hall. I kept my phone hidden under my pillow, recorded voices when they argued, when they whispered. I needed proof, even if I didn't yet know who I'd show it to. Carla called again. I told her to keep a copy of my house deed. She didn't ask questions, just came by one evening, hugged me tighter than usual, and left with the envelope. Then came the day Glenn told me not to come downstairs during dinner. "Emma's bringing guests," he said. "It'll be awkward." I asked, "Awkward for who?" He didn't answer. I stayed upstairs, but the sound carried. Laughter, clinking glasses, Emma calling him babe, once by accident. They all laughed it off. Later that night, I found lipstick stains on his shirt again. This time, I didn't hide the evidence. I left it folded on his pillow. He didn't speak to me the next morning, just grabbed his keys and left. Emma stayed behind, smirking at her coffee mug like she'd won something. But that's the thing about people like her. They celebrate before the game's over. That afternoon, I walked into the bank, asked to freeze my joint accounts. The manager hesitated until I showed her the refinance request Glenn had forged. Within an hour, every cent was locked down. When Glenn came home that night, he looked shaken. "Why would you do that?" he asked. "Because I'm not done yet," I said. For the first time, I saw fear flicker across his face. Not guilt, just the fear of losing control. That weekend, he started calling my sister, telling her I was losing touch with reality. She called me crying, asking if I needed help. I told her no, but she didn't sound convinced. The seed had been planted. Emma played her part beautifully, comforting Glenn in public, pretending to worry about me, visiting my friends behind my back to check in. She was rehearsing my disappearance before it even happened. Then one night, I woke to the sound of glass breaking, the back door. I went downstairs quietly and found Glenn by the kitchen counter, holding a bottle. He jumped when he saw me. "Jesus, Nancy, you scared me." "What are you doing?" He looked at the floor. "Just needed air." There was no air. The house felt suffocating. When I turned to go back upstairs, Emma appeared at the doorway. She wasn't surprised to see me. She looked calm, almost pleased. "Everything okay?" she asked. Glenn said, "Yeah, just a misunderstanding." But I saw the plan in her eyes. She wanted me to react, to yell, to hit, to give them a reason to say I'd snapped. Instead, I smiled. I'm fine. Just checking if the glass cut anyone. Then I went upstairs and wrote everything down. Every detail. Every look. Every sound. By the end of the week, Glenn said he needed a few days away. Business trip. Emma went with him. That's when I acted. I called the lawyer who handled my first husband's estate, told him to update my will. Everything to be transferred to a trust in Carla's name. If anything happened to me, Glenn would get nothing. 2 days later, Glenn came home alone. Said Emma had decided to stay with friends. His hands shook when he poured his drink. Are you happy now? He asked. I looked him straight in the eye. Are you? He didn't answer. That night, I locked my bedroom door for the first time. But even with the lock, I couldn't sleep, because somewhere deep down I knew they weren't finished with me yet. The day after Glenn came back, the house went silent in that way it does before a storm. He didn't speak much, just hovered around the kitchen, pretending to fix things that weren't broken. I could feel him studying me, waiting for a misstep. By evening, he handed me a cup of tea, said it might help me sleep. I stared at it for a full minute before setting it down. I'll have it later, I told him. He smiled thinly. Suit yourself. The next morning, the cup was gone. Later that week, I started feeling dizzy. Not sick exactly, just off. My body didn't feel like it belonged to me. The timing was too neat to be coincidence. I threw out everything in the kitchen that wasn't sealed. From that point, I only ate food I'd bought myself. When I told Glenn I didn't trust him anymore, he didn't get angry. He laughed. Nancy, he said, you've really lost it. Then he added almost softly, you should get help before people start believing I'm the crazy one. That's when I realized how far ahead they were. The house was wired with their lies. Every person I tried to reach, friends, neighbors, even my sister, had already been told I was paranoid, unstable, maybe dangerous. When I went to the bank again to check the status of my account, the manager said Glenn had called in earlier, worried about my mental state. They'd frozen my personal funds for my protection. It was subtle warfare, the kind that doesn't need guns. Just paperwork and charm. 2 days later, I woke to a letter slid under my door. From your doctor, it said in his tidy handwriting. A printed note recommending a temporary rest stay at a private facility. Glenn had signed as my emergency contact. I laughed when I read it. The sound startled me. It didn't even sound human. That afternoon, I walked to Carla's house with a suitcase. She opened the door before I knocked twice. What happened now? She asked. I said, I need to disappear for a while. For the next 2 weeks, I stayed with her in her basement, quiet and unseen. Glenn called my phone 23 times, then stopped. Emma left a voicemail. Dad's worried. Please come home. I deleted it. But disappearing didn't fix anything. When I finally went back, my house looked the same, but felt wrong. My things had been rearranged again, my clothes folded differently. Glenn stood in the doorway smiling, said he was glad I'd calmed down. I realized then that he didn't want me gone. Not yet. He needed me to look crazy first. The next morning, 2 officers knocked on my door, said they'd received a call from my husband, claiming I'd been making threats. They checked the house, asked me routine questions, left politely, but I could see it in their eyes. The doubt had been planted there too. That night, Glenn cooked dinner. Again. Steak this time. You've got to stop this, I said. He looked up slowly. Stop what? Pretending you're still my husband. He smiled. You're right. Maybe I shouldn't pretend anymore. Then he took a bite and walked away. Emma came home the next evening. She'd changed her hair. Darker, sharper. Like a reflection of someone she was trying to become. She hugged me in front of Glenn, said she'd missed me. Her perfume lingered long after she let go. We sat in the living room. She looked at me with that calm, trained expression. You know, Nancy, she said. It'd be easier for everyone if you just moved on. Let Dad live his life. You could find a place near the coast or something. And you? I asked. Where do you fit in his life? She tilted her head, smirked. Where I've always been. Next to him. That was the first time she said it out loud. Not love, not marriage, just next to him. Like an admission and a threat wrapped in one. I didn't argue. Just stood up, took my bag, and went to my room. But that night, I didn't lock the door. I wanted to see how far they'd go. Around 2 a.m., I heard the floor creak. Glenn's shadow passed by, paused at my door, then moved away. I stayed perfectly still until sunrise. The next morning, I walked to the police station, told them everything. The forged refinance, the gaslighting, the manipulation. The officer listened politely, wrote a few notes, then said, "Ma'am, is it possible you're under stress?" I laughed again, that same hollow laugh. "You'll find out soon enough," I said, and walked out. When I got home, Glenn was waiting on the porch. "Did you tell them?" he asked. "Yes," I said. He smiled. Actually smiled. "Good. Now they'll know what to expect when you finally snap." I wanted to hit him. Instead, I turned around and went upstairs, locked the door. That night, I packed another bag, not to run, but to prepare. I started leaving little traces for whoever might come after. Copies of my recordings on a USB, letters with dates and names. Everything sealed in an envelope marked, "If I'm gone." I mailed it to Carla. I wasn't scared anymore. I was just tired. Then 2 mornings later, I woke up and my car was gone. Glenn said it had been towed for maintenance. When I checked, there was no record. He shrugged. Must have been a mix-up. Emma wasn't around that day. Glenn spent the afternoon in his office. Door closed, phone calls muted. By night, I felt the house closing in again. When I finally went to bed, I left the light on. Somewhere after midnight, I woke to the smell of smoke, not thick or choking, just faint, like something smoldering. I ran downstairs and found a pile of papers burning in the kitchen sink. My letters, my proof. Glenn stood behind me. "You shouldn't leave things lying around," he said softly. "Someone might misunderstand." I turned to him. "You did this?" He stepped closer. "You've done this to yourself." The way he said it, calm, confident, made my skin crawl. I wanted to scream, but I didn't, because I knew then. This wasn't about fire, or lies, or even Emma. It was about erasing me piece by piece until there was nothing left to fight. And the worst part? It was working. The morning after the fire, I sat at the kitchen table and stared at the ashes in the sink. The smoke had left a gray film on the counter, the kind you can wipe away but still smell later. Glenn walked past me like nothing had happened. He poured his coffee, hummed under his breath, checked his phone. Emma came downstairs dressed for work. "You should get some rest," she said, voice soft, measured. "You look worn out." I looked up at her. "You burned everything." She blinked once, the faintest pause. "I don't know what you mean." That was the final confirmation. I didn't need proof anymore. I'd already lost the part of my life that made proof matter. Over the next few weeks, they stopped hiding what they were. She moved her things into his room. My name disappeared from bills, from the mailbox, from the Wi-Fi password. I called the bank one last time. The accounts were closed. I'd become a ghost, still living in her own house. Carla begged me to come stay with her again, but I couldn't. I told her it was fine, that I'd figure things out. She knew it wasn't true, but she stopped asking. People always stop asking once the story turns uncomfortable. One afternoon, a realtor's sign appeared on the front lawn. When I confronted Glenn, he handed me a stack of papers. My signature was on them, forged but perfect. "You sold the house," I said. He shrugged. "You wanted a fresh start." I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it sounded like something I might have actually said years ago, when life still had meaning. Within a month, everything was gone. My furniture, my photos, my garden that I'd planted myself. The new owners came by to inspect. Glenn introduced me as a distant relative helping with the move. I nodded and smiled, as if agreeing to my own erasure. When the movers left, I took a single box, old letters, a few clothes, a broken wristwatch from my first husband, and walked out. Glenn didn't even look up from his phone. Emma stood at the doorway watching. She didn't say goodbye. I rented a small room near the highway, paid month to month in cash. The walls were thin. The air smelled like detergent and loneliness. I started working part-time at a diner nearby. The manager called me ma'am. Customers barely looked up. Every night I sat by the window and watched headlights smear across the glass. Sometimes I thought about calling Glenn, just to hear what lives sounded like when they were no longer meant for me. I never did. A year passed. One day I saw them on the news. A local business feature about a successful father-daughter real estate team. They stood side by side, smiling under soft lights, perfectly rehearsed. My name didn't exist. I turned off the TV, sat back in the silence, and realized the cruelest part wasn't losing them. It was knowing that they'd built their happiness out of my disappearance, and that the world applauded it. Sometimes, when customers at the diner leave a generous tip, I tell them thank you with a voice that still sounds like the woman I used to be. Then I go home and whisper to myself, they can erase your name, but not your memory. It's not revenge. It's not peace either. It's just survival, the kind that keeps breathing even after the story ends. So if you're listening, remember me. I was here once. A wife, a stepmother, a woman who lost everything quietly. And maybe that's how some stories are meant to finish. Not with justice, not with fire, just with the sound of one last door closing.